The phone rang until the silence felt louder than any scream. One missed call, then another. When the message finally came, "I'm busy," it landed like a quiet execution. No explanation, no apology, just two words that erased years of marriage. What made it worse wasn't the silence. It was the sound Damien thought he heard before the line went dead. A man's laugh, low and familiar, as if he belonged there. In that moment, something snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. Damien typed back a sentence that would burn his old life to the ground. "Stay with him. Don't come home." What his wife didn't know was that this betrayal wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the key to a much darker truth, one that would expose lies carefully buried for months. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. And if you're drawn to cinematic, emotional stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The apartment felt different after that message was sent, as if the walls themselves had shifted a few inches farther away from him. Damien Holt stood by the kitchen window, phone still in his hand, watching the city lights blur through a thin film of rain. He didn't move for a long time. He didn't need to. The silence had weight now, pressing against his chest, daring him to breathe wrong. This wasn't how betrayals were supposed to happen. He had always imagined shouting, slammed doors, shattered glass. As if marriage could be postponed like a meeting, Damien replayed the call in his head, frame by frame. The ringing, the delay, the faint noise in the background that didn't belong to an office or a cafe, the sound of comfort, familiarity, and underneath it all, the certainty that this wasn't the first time he had been left waiting. He set the phone down and finally exhaled. His reflection in the dark window startled him, a man in his late 30s, tall, broad-shouldered, usually steady. Tonight, his eyes looked older, sharpened by something close to grief but not quite surrender. He had built his life on consistency. Wake early, work hard, come home, love quietly, trust deeply. He believed that if you did the right things long enough, life would eventually respect you for it. That belief trembled now. Earlier that evening, nothing had felt wrong. He had left the office late, like usual, carrying the weight of deadlines and decisions that affected hundreds of employees. His phone had buzzed once with her name. He smiled then, already rehearsing the apology for being late, already picturing her, curled on the couch with her laptop, hair falling into her eyes the way it always did when she was focused. He had called back immediately. No answer. He told himself not to read into it. She had meetings. She had a life. He prided himself on being the kind of husband who didn't hover. Control was a language he refused to speak. His own father had mastered it, and Damien had spent years unlearning the damage it caused. So he waited, 15 minutes, then 30. When the text finally arrived, he stared at it longer than he should have, as if it might rearrange itself into something kinder if he looked hard enough. It didn't. 2 words, perfect punctuation, no heart emoji. No explanation. That was when he called again. The ring lasted only a second before it went to voicemail. And in that second, he heard it. Not clearly enough to accuse. Not vaguely enough to ignore. A man's voice, low and amused, close to the phone, too close. Damien didn't throw anything. He didn't curse. He sat down at the edge of the bed and felt something inside him go very still. Rage would have been easier. Fear would have made more sense. What he felt instead was recognition, like finally seeing the shape of something that had been casting a shadow for months. There had been signs. He could admit that now. The way she started guarding her phone like it was a secret diary instead of a tool. The sudden schedule changes that never quite lined up. The new clothes that felt less like self-expression and more like armor. The way she looked past him sometimes, as if her attention was tethered somewhere else. He had explained it all away. Stress, ambition, growth. He had chosen trust every time doubt knocked. Now doubt had kicked the door in. The sentence he sent back, "Stay with him. Don't come home," surprised even him. It wasn't a bluff. It wasn't cruelty. It was the first honest thing he'd said all night. He wasn't asking her to leave. He was telling her he refused to pretend anymore. Minutes passed. No response. Damien stood and began to move through the apartment, touching things like he was taking inventory. The framed photo from their anniversary trip, her smile wide and unguarded, the coffee mug she always forgot to wash, the jacket she'd left draped over the chair that morning, smelling faintly of her perfume. He realized, with a cold clarity, that she hadn't packed anything essential today. Whatever she had planned, it hadn't included staying somewhere new overnight, which meant this wasn't spontaneous. That thought hurt more than the laugh. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, not to spy, not yet, but to ground himself in something factual. He pulled up their shared calendar. Most of the entries were mundane meetings, dinners, reminders. But as he scrolled back over the last few months, a pattern emerged. Blocks of time labeled vaguely. Work, dinner. Late. Too neat. Too repetitive. Damien had made a career out of noticing patterns other people missed. He had just never wanted to use that skill on his own marriage. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. His mother's voice surfaced uninvited, pulled from a memory he hadn't visited in years. When people lie to you calmly, it's because they've practiced. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Damien had promised himself he wouldn't. The phone buzzed again. His pulse jumped, traitorous and hopeful. Before his mind caught up, a message preview lit the screen. Not from her. Unknown number. You should stop calling her. His jaw tightened. The message didn't threaten. It didn't explain. It simply existed, like a hand placed firmly on his chest. Damien stared at it, every muscle suddenly alert. This was no longer about a marriage cracking under pressure. This was something else, something deliberate. He typed back slowly, choosing each word like it might be used against him. Who is this? The typing indicator appeared almost instantly, then vanished. No reply. Outside, a siren wailed and faded into the distance. The city went on, indifferent. Damien realized, with a strange calm, that whatever was unfolding had already been set in motion long before tonight. The missed call wasn't the start. It was the reveal. He stood again, shoulders squaring, something resolute settling into place. He didn't know yet who the man was. He didn't know what his wife had tangled herself into. But he knew this much. He would not chase answers like a desperate man. He would let the truth come to him, one piece at a time. And when it did, he would be ready. For the first time since the phone had gone silent, Damien Holt felt the faintest sense of control return. Morning arrived without permission. Damien hadn't slept, only drifted in and out of shallow stillness, his mind circling the same unanswered questions like a moth trapped in a glass. The other side of the bed remained untouched, sheets smooth, cold, and when the sun finally crept through the blinds, it didn't feel hopeful. It felt invasive, exposing what the night had allowed him to avoid. He showered longer than necessary, letting the water beat against his shoulders until his skin burned. It was the only sensation that felt real. As he dressed, his phone lay silent on the counter. No apology, no explanation, not even anger. That silence spoke louder than any confession. At work, Damien moved on instinct. Meetings happened, decisions were made. People listened to him the way they always had, with respect and trust. That, more than anything, unsettled him. His life hadn't collapsed outwardly. The world still believed in him, even if the one person who mattered most had quietly stepped out of their shared reality. Around noon, he received a message from her. Just one line. "We need to talk." Damien stared at it until the words lost meaning. Of course they did. There was always a conversation waiting somewhere in the future, always a promise of clarity later. He didn't respond right away. For the first time, he allowed her to sit with uncertainty. He left the office early, not because he was overwhelmed, but because his instincts told him to move. He drove without a destination at first, letting the city blur past, until his hands turned the wheel almost on their own. He stopped 2 blocks from a cafe Serena had mentioned weeks ago, casually, too casually, as if she'd practiced saying its name without significance. The place was warm and polished, full of soft music and low voices. Damien chose a table near the window and waited, coffee untouched. He didn't expect to see her. That wasn't why he was there. He was watching the room, the reflections in the glass, the way people entered and scanned for someone familiar. That was when he saw him. The man fit too easily into the space, moving with the confidence of someone who believed he belonged wherever he stood. Mid-40s, tailored coat, easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He laughed at something the barista said, and the sound sent a chill straight through Damien's spine. It was the same laugh. The man glanced around, eyes passing over Damien without recognition, then settled into a corner table. A moment later, Serena walked in. She didn't look guilty. She looked prepared. Her hair was styled differently, softer than usual, and she wore a coat Damien had never seen before. She smiled when she saw the man, a smile Damien recognized but hadn't received in months. It wasn't passionate. It was comfortable, practiced. Damien didn't move. He didn't reach for his phone. He watched as they leaned toward each other, close enough that their knees touched. The man said something, and Serena laughed, touching his arm lightly, briefly, like a reflex. There it was, not a single dramatic gesture, just intimacy made ordinary. Something inside Damien hardened, not into anger, but into resolve. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a pattern. He left before they noticed him, the bell over the door ringing too loudly as he stepped outside. The cold air hit his face, sharp and clarifying. He leaned against the brick wall, breathing slowly, counting the seconds until the shaking in his hands stopped. That was when his phone rang. Her name filled the screen. Damien answered without greeting. "I can explain," she said quickly, her voice tight, controlled. "Please don't do this here, so you know where I am," he replied calmly. Silence stretched between them. Not shocked silence, calculating silence. "You followed me," she asked. "No," Damien said. "I noticed you." Another pause. Then, quieter. "This isn't what you think." He almost laughed. "Almost. I didn't tell you what I think." "You're overreacting," she said, slipping into a tone he'd heard before, one designed to soothe and dismiss at the same time. "He's helping me with something, that's all." "Helping you lie?" Damien asked. "Helping you disappear? That's not fair. Neither is being married to someone who treats the truth like an inconvenience." Her breath hitched. For a moment, he thought he'd cracked something open. Then her voice steadied. "You don't understand what's at stake." That sentence landed heavier than any admission. "Then help me understand," Damien said, "because right now, I'm done guessing." She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her words were careful. "Not over the phone." "Then don't come home," Damien replied, repeating the line from the night before, not as a threat, but as a boundary. He ended the call before she could argue. The drive back felt longer. Every red light gave his thoughts time to sharpen. He replayed the unknown message from the night before. "You should stop calling her." He saw the man's confident posture, the way Serena had leaned in without hesitation. None of it felt impulsive. At home, Damien opened a folder he hadn't touched in years. Documents, contracts, financial records. He wasn't looking for proof of an affair. He was looking for leverage, patterns, inconsistencies. Hours passed. As dusk settled, a knock sounded at the door. Damien didn't open it right away. He checked the peephole. Serena stood there alone. He opened the door, but didn't step aside. Her eyes searched his face, and for the first time, he saw fear there. Real fear, not performance. "Can we talk now?" she asked softly. Damien nodded and stepped back, letting her in without a word. She didn't take off her coat. She didn't sit. She stood in the middle of the living room like a visitor who knew she wasn't welcome. He's not just someone I'm seeing, she began, voice trembling despite herself. You need to understand that. I already do, Damien said quietly. That's why I'm listening. She swallowed. I made a mistake, a series of them, and you planned them carefully, he replied. Not an accusation, an observation. Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. I didn't mean for it to become this. Damien crossed his arms, grounding himself. Then tell me what this is. She hesitated too long. In that hesitation, Damien felt the last thread of denial snap. Whatever story she was about to tell would change everything, and he was finally ready to hear it. Serena's silence stretched until it became unbearable. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally looked away, as if the truth was something physical she couldn't quite face. Damien waited. He had learned that rushing people only helped them lie better. It started as business, she said at last. I didn't think it would matter. Damien felt a dull pressure behind his eyes. It always matters, she nodded, gripping the strap of her coat like it might keep her upright. He approached me months ago. He knew things about you, about your position, about the accounts you oversee. He said he had opportunities, investments. He said we could be comfortable, free. Damien studied her face, searching for the woman he married, and you believed him. I wanted to, she whispered. I was tired of waiting, tired of being second to your work, tired of feeling invisible. The words stung, but Damien didn't interrupt. He had learned something else in his life. Pain didn't excuse betrayal, but it did explain how people justified it. So you lied, he said calmly. You met him. You let him into our life. Her eyes flicked up, defensive. I didn't plan to hurt you. You planned to deceive me, Damien replied. That's worse. She flinched. You don't understand what he's capable of. Then explain it, Damien said, his voice steady. Because from where I'm standing, he's already crossed lines he can't uncross. Serena hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a slim phone Damien had never seen before and held it like evidence and confession all at once. He told me to keep this separate, said it was safer. Damien's jaw tightened. Safer for who? For him, she admitted. And for me? He said if anything went wrong, he had records, messages, transfers. He said he could make it look like it all came from you. The room felt colder. Damien's mind began assembling pieces faster now, each one clicking into place with sickening precision. So that's why you kept pushing me to sign those documents last quarter, he said quietly. The revised authorizations, the ones that rerouted oversight. Serena's shoulders sagged. I didn't think it would go that far, but it did, Damien said. And you let it. Her voice broke. I was scared. So was I, Damien replied. Every time you looked me in the eye and lied. She took a step toward him, tears finally spilling. Please. I didn't know how to get out. You could have told me, he said. At any point. He warned me not to, she whispered. He said if I did, he'd destroy you. Damien felt something shift inside him then. Not fear, not rage, clarity. Miles, he could finally name him in his own head, hadn't seduced Serena by accident. He had targeted her because she was close to Damien, because she had access, because she loved him enough to be afraid of losing him. That message I got last night, Damien said slowly. That was him, Serena nodded. He knows you're paying attention now. Damien exhaled, long and controlled. Good. She stared at him, startled. What do you mean? I mean he underestimated me, Damien said. And so did you. He turned away and walked to his desk, opening a drawer and pulling out a folder thick with documents. Serena watched, confused, as he spread them out on the table. I've already copied everything, Damien continued. Every authorization, every timestamp, every discrepancy. If he tries to pin this on me, he'll have to explain how I documented it weeks before tonight. Her eyes widened. You've been preparing. I've been paying attention, Damien corrected. There's a difference. Serena sank onto the couch, trembling. What are you going to do? Damien looked at her then. Really looked. He saw the woman he loved and the stranger she had become, layered over each other, impossible to separate cleanly. I'm going to protect myself, he said, and then I'm going to expose him. And me? She asked, voice small. That depends, Damien replied, on whether you're willing to stop lying. She nodded quickly. I'll tell you everything, I swear. Not to me, Damien said, to the truth. A sudden knock at the door made them both jump. Serena's face drained of color. Damien raised a hand, signaling her to stay still. He checked the peephole. No one. Another knock followed. Firmer this time. Damien opened the door cautiously. A man stood in the hallway, impeccably dressed, smile polite and rehearsed. He held out a business card between two fingers. Good evening, he said smoothly. Conrad Voss. I represent a mutual acquaintance. Damien didn't take the card. You have 10 seconds. Conrad chuckled softly, unfazed. I'm here to offer a solution. Things have gotten messy. My client would prefer a clean resolution. Your client threatened my wife, Damien said flatly. And your reputation, Conrad replied. We'd like to ensure neither suffers unnecessarily. Serena appeared behind Damien, frozen. Conrad's gaze flicked to her, assessing. Ms. Holt, he said warmly. I hope you're well. Damien stepped slightly to block the line of sight. Get to the point. Conrad nodded. Sign a non-disclosure. Withdraw your inquiries. Encourage your wife to do the same. In exchange, this all goes away. Damien smiled then, a small, humorless curve of his lips. You came to the wrong door. Conrad's expression tightened, just a fraction. You don't fully grasp the leverage at play. I do, Damien replied. You just don't realize yours is evaporating. Conrad studied him for a long moment, then tucked the card back into his pocket. Think carefully, he said. Men in your position fall hard. Damien held his gaze. So do men who think they're untouchable. Conrad inclined his head, masking irritation with civility. We'll be in touch. The door closed with a soft click. Serena sank back against the wall, shaking. That was him, she whispered. That's how it works. Polite, threatening, clean. Damien locked the door, then turned to her. Pack a bag. Her head snapped up. What? You're not staying here tonight, Damien said. Not because I don't care. Because I do. Tears streamed down her face. You're sending me away. I'm removing leverage, he replied. Mine and his. She hesitated, then nodded, defeated. Where will I go? That's your choice, Damien said. Just don't lie about it. She moved slowly, mechanically, gathering a few essentials. At the door, she stopped. I never meant to lose you, she said. Damien met her eyes, steady and sad. You didn't lose me, he said. You gave me up. When the door closed behind her, Damien leaned against it, eyes closed. His heart ached, but his mind was sharper than it had ever been. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about survival. He returned to his desk, opened his laptop, and began to write an email. Not to confront, not to plead, to document. Whatever Miles had started, Damien was going to finish. The email took longer than Damien expected, not because he lacked words, but because each sentence carried weight. He chose language that was precise, unemotional, impossible to twist. Dates, times, attachments, facts stripped of interpretation. When he finally hit send, the room felt quieter, as if something dangerous had been acknowledged aloud and could no longer hide in the corners. He didn't send it to authorities. Not yet. He sent it to himself, to a secure archive, to a contact he trusted implicitly, insurance. His phone buzzed almost immediately, not with a reply, but with a reminder he'd set months ago, long forgotten, a quarterly audit review. The irony didn't escape him. Miles had assumed Damien was distracted, complacent. He had mistaken calm for blindness. Damien barely slept again, but this time it wasn't panic keeping him awake. It was momentum. By morning, Serena's side of the closet was noticeably emptier. The absence landed like a bruise, tender but contained. Damien dressed carefully, choosing neutral colors, the armor of normalcy. He understood now that visibility was both a shield and a weapon. If Miles wanted him isolated, then Damien would be everywhere he was expected to be. At the office, the atmosphere felt unchanged on the surface. Polite greetings, familiar rhythms. But Damien noticed things he hadn't before. The way certain colleagues avoided eye contact, and the way others lingered, just a beat too long. Information traveled faster than truth. He smiled when required, spoke when necessary, and spent the rest of the day quietly observing. Late afternoon brought Lena Park to his door. She didn't knock. She never did. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, eyes sharp with concern. "You look like hell," she said. "Good to see you too," Damien replied, allowing the faintest smile. She stepped inside and lowered her voice. "I heard rumors." "Of course you did. Tell me they're wrong." Damien hesitated. Lena wasn't just a colleague. She had stood beside him through crises that had ended careers and ruined reputations. If anyone deserved the truth, it was her. "They're incomplete," he said carefully. That was enough. Lena closed the door and sat across from him. He told her everything, not emotionally, not dramatically, but thoroughly. The affair, the threat, Conrad's visit, the implication that he was being positioned as collateral damage. When he finished, Lena exhaled slowly. "This isn't a personal scandal," she said. "It's a setup." "Yes, and Serena." Damien's jaw tightened. "She's part of it, willingly or not." Lena nodded, already thinking several steps ahead. "You have documentation. More than he expects." "Good," she said, "because Miles Kincaid doesn't bluff unless he's cornered, and when he is, he burns everything around him." Damien leaned back, studying the ceiling. "Then I won't corner him yet." Lena's eyes flicked to him. "You're planning something." "I'm buying time," Damien said. "And I'm watching who flinches." That night, Damien attended a charity gala he'd planned to skip. He arrived alone, impeccably composed. The picture of stability. The whispers followed him anyway. He felt them brush against his back like static. Then he saw Miles across the room. Up close, Miles Kincaid was almost disarmingly pleasant. His smile was easy, his handshake firm. He approached Damien with open familiarity, as if nothing had changed. "Damien," he said warmly, "I was hoping I'd see you." "I'm sure," Damien replied. Miles's gaze flicked briefly to Damien's empty side. "I trust Serena is well." "She's safe," Damien said. "For now." Something dark passed through Miles's eyes, quickly masked. "I'd hate for misunderstandings to escalate," he said smoothly. "People get hurt when communication breaks down." "Is that a concern of yours?" Damien asked. Miles chuckled. "Only when it affects good people." Damien leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough. "Then you should be very concerned." They held each other's gaze, the noise of the gala fading into a dull roar. Miles broke first, smile returning like a switch had been flipped. "Enjoy the evening," he said. Retreating, Damien watched him go, noting the stiffness in his shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was something. Later that night, Damien found the message he'd been expecting, an email from an anonymous account, a single attachment, a financial document bearing his name, forged, but convincingly so. The subject line read, "Last Chance." Damien forwarded it to Lena without comment. Minutes later, his phone rang. "This is escalation," Lena said. "He's rushing." "Good," Damien replied. Rushed men make mistakes. At home, the apartment felt too quiet. Damien poured himself a drink he didn't want and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the faint ring left behind by Serena's mug. He allowed himself a few minutes to grieve, not for the marriage as it was, but for the trust he'd given so freely. His phone buzzed again. This time, It was Serena. He considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, he answered. "Damien," she said, breathless. "You need to listen to me." "I'm listening," he replied. "He's panicking," she said. "I can feel it. He's making calls he never made before." "Why are you telling me this?" Damien asked. "Because I don't want you hurt," she said. "Because I know I've already done enough damage." Damien closed his eyes. "Where are you?" She hesitated. "Does it matter?" "Yes," he said. "Everything matters now." Another pause. "I'm not with him," she said quietly. "I promise." "That's not an answer," Damien replied. "I'm trying to fix this," she said. "He thinks I'm still loyal." Damien's pulse quickened. "Be careful," he said. "He's not as calm as he pretends." "I know," Serena whispered. "That's why I'm scared." Before Damien could respond, the call cut off. He stared at the phone, unease crawling up his spine. Serena was reckless when emotional, and fear made her unpredictable. An hour later, Lena called back. "We have movement," she said. "One of Miles's shell accounts just transferred a significant sum offshore." Damien stood. "He's running. Or preparing to," Lena replied. "Either way." The clock's ticking. Damien paced the living room, mind racing. He thought of Serena, alone and compromised. He thought of the forged documents waiting to be deployed. He thought of the man who had mistaken his patience for weakness. "No," Damien said suddenly. "He's not running." "What makes you say that?" Lena asked. "Because he wants me scared," Damien replied. "He wants me reactive. Running is an admission. This is a warning." Silence hummed on the line. Then Lena said, "Then what's your move?" Damien looked at the city lights through the window, sharp and unforgiving. "I let him think he's winning," Lena exhaled. "That's dangerous." "So is doing nothing," Damien said. "I'll attend the meeting tomorrow. I'll act compliant. I'll give him just enough rope." "And Serena?" Damien's voice softened. "I'll protect her if I can, but I won't let her lie for him anymore." When the call ended, Damien sat alone again, the weight of the coming day pressing down on him. He knew this was no longer about clearing his name. It was about control, who held it, and who paid the price for losing it. Somewhere in the network, connection lost. Attempting to reconnect, the meeting room smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee gone cold. Damien arrived early on purpose, choosing the seat that put his back to the window and his face in clear view. Visibility mattered today. If Miles wanted a performance, Damien would give him one, just not the kind he expected. When the others filed in, their greetings were measured, professional, laced with the careful neutrality of people who sensed tension but didn't yet understand its source. Miles entered last, unhurried, confidence stitched into every step. He took the seat across from Damien, offering a smile that was almost friendly. "Good morning," Miles said. "I appreciate you making time." Damien inclined his head. "I always do." The discussion began with numbers, forecasts, projections that floated harmlessly on the surface. Damien contributed when asked, his tone even, his posture relaxed. He watched Miles more than the documents, cataloging micro-reactions, the tightening of a jaw, the subtle pause before answering a question that should have been easy. Halfway through, Miles slid a folder across the table. "There's a minor adjustment we'd like you to review," he said. "Just a formality." Damien opened it slowly. Inside was a revised authorization, similar to the one Serena had once nudged him to sign, but broader, sloppier. A rushed hand showed itself in the margins. He looked up. "This transfers oversight entirely," Damien said. "That's not minor." Miles shrugged lightly. "Efficiency," he replied. "Red tape slows progress." Damien closed the folder. "So does prison." The room went quiet. Miles's smile faltered. "Just enough." "That's not funny." "I wasn't joking," Damien said calmly. "This exposes everyone here." A beat passed. Then Miles leaned back, adopting a tone of mild disappointment. "You seem distracted lately. Personal matters can cloud judgment." Damien met his gaze. "Only if you let them." The meeting ended without signatures. Miles didn't push. That, more than anything, confirmed Damien's suspicion. Miles wasn't confident anymore. He was calculating. As Damien left the building, his phone vibrated. A message from Lena. He's nervous. Offshore transfer reversed. Money moved back. Damien allowed himself a single breath of relief. The rope was tightening. By evening, the city felt charged. As if something unseen was gathering momentum, Damien drove toward the address. Serena had finally sent an hour earlier, a short text, no explanation. He didn't know what he'd find, only that avoiding it would be worse. The building was modest, anonymous. He found her sitting on the front steps, arms wrapped around herself despite the mild air. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the polish she'd worn so effortlessly before. She stood when she saw him. "I didn't think you'd come. I said everything matters," Damien replied. They stood in silence for a moment, neither quite ready to close the distance. Finally, Serena spoke. "He knows I talked to you." Damien's chest tightened. "How?" "He monitors everything," she said. "Calls, messages. He said loyalty was the price of protection. And now he doesn't trust me," she admitted. "I think he's planning something tonight." Damien studied her face, searching for deception. He found fear instead, raw and unguarded. "Did he hurt you?" Damien asked quietly. She shook her head. "Not physically." The answer wasn't comforting. "Listen to me," Damien said. "If he contacts you, you don't respond. If anyone shows up, you call me. Not him, not Conrad, me." Her eyes filled. "Why are you still protecting me?" Damien hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because despite everything, I won't become the kind of man who abandons someone in danger." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't deserve that." "No," Damien agreed gently. "But you're getting it anyway." His phone rang before he could say more. "Unknown number." Damien answered. "This is Damien Holt." "Mr. Holt." Conrad's smooth voice replied. "I trust you're reconsidering." "I am," Damien said. "I've decided not to sign anything." A pause. "That's unfortunate." "For you," Damien replied. Conrad sighed. "You're forcing our hand." Damien looked at Serena, then turned away. "Then play it." The line went dead. Minutes later, Lena called. "He's made his move," she said. Anonymous tip filed. "Financial misconduct. Your name all over it." Damien closed his eyes. Timing. "Now," Lena replied, "authorities are reviewing." Serena's breath hitched. "This is my fault." "It's his," Damien said. "And it's not over." They moved quickly. Damien drove Serena to a safer location, a place Lena had arranged. Quiet and monitored. He stayed only long enough to make sure she was inside, then left before sentiment could slow him down. At home, Damien opened his laptop and began sending emails. Not defensively, strategically, he released his documentation in stages to multiple parties, each piece time-stamped and verified. He included the forged document, the offshore transfers, the pressure tactics. He let the truth speak without embellishment. As midnight approached, his phone buzzed relentlessly. Missed calls, messages, some concerned, some accusatory. One from Miles himself. "You don't know what you've done," Damien typed back once. "I do." The knock on his door came just after 1. He didn't open it immediately. He checked the peephole. 2 men stood in the hallway. Plain clothes but unmistakable. He opened the door. "Damien Holt?" One asked. "Yes. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Damien nodded and stepped aside, heart steady. This was what Miles had wanted. Public pressure, intimidation, masked as procedure. Damien had prepared for it. The questioning lasted an hour. Damien answered calmly, providing references, documents, explanations. When they left, they did so without cuffs, without threats. Not victory, but not defeat either. As dawn crept in, Damien sat alone at the kitchen table, exhaustion finally seeping into his bones. He thought of Serena, of Lena, of the life he'd assumed was solid beneath his feet. He thought of how close he'd come to losing everything, simply because he'd trusted the wrong person. His phone buzzed one last time. A message from Lena. Miles is in trouble. Real trouble. Board members distancing. Conrad unreachable. Damien leaned back, closing his eyes. The storm wasn't over, but the wind had shifted for the first time since the missed call that started it all. Damien allowed himself a fragile sense of hope. Not that things would return to how they were, but that whatever came next would be built on truth, and this time, truth was on his side. The days that followed blurred into a tense rhythm Damien barely recognized as his own life. Mornings began with briefings from Lena, afternoons with careful appearances meant to project stability, nights with restless silence that pressed in on him from all sides. He learned quickly that once suspicion entered a system, it spread like ink in water, slow at first, then everywhere at once. Miles didn't disappear. He adapted. Damien saw his name surface in subtle ways. A delay in a routine approval, a meeting quietly removed from his calendar, a polite but distant email from a colleague who had once trusted him without question. None of it was overt. All of it was intentional. Miles was tightening the net, testing how much pressure Damien could withstand before he broke. Damien refused to give him that satisfaction. He arrived early every day, left late, and documented everything. He spoke less, listened more. He noticed who avoided him and who lingered to ask how he was holding up. Patterns formed. Allies revealed themselves not through loud support, but through quiet consistency. One evening, as Damien prepared to leave the office, Lena appeared again, this time closing the door behind her with deliberate care. "They're moving faster than we thought," she said. Damien didn't look up from his screen. "How fast?" "Miles's board is fracturing," Lena replied. "2 members resigned this morning. One is talking to regulators." That got his attention. Damien straightened. "And Miles, he's lashing out," she said. "Threatening lawsuits, burning bridges." Damien nodded slowly. "Desperation." "Yes," Lena agreed. "And desperation makes people sloppy." That night, Damien received an encrypted message from a number he didn't recognize. No greeting, just coordinates and a time. Beneath it, a single sentence. "If you want the truth, come alone." Every instinct warned him against it. And yet, instinct was what had brought him this far. He forwarded the message to Lena and left his phone location on. Then he went. The address led him to an underground parking structure near the river, half-lit and echoing with distant traffic. Damien parked and waited, engine off, senses sharp. He counted his breaths, grounding himself. A figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't Miles. The man was older, grayer, dressed without pretense. He approached slowly, hands visible. "Damien Holt," he said. "Thank you for coming." "Who are you?" Damien asked. "My name doesn't matter," the man replied. "What matters is that I used to work for Miles Kincaid." Damien's pulse quickened, but his face remained still. "Why are you here?" "Because I'm tired," the man said simply. "And because I don't want to be the one holding the bag when this collapses." Damien studied him. "What do you have?" "Proof," the man replied. "Records. Transfers. Conversations you were never meant to see." "Why give them to me?" Damien asked. The man hesitated. "Because he crossed a line involving someone I care about, and because you're the only one fighting back without trying to save your own skin." That stung. But Damien understood the point. "Where is this proof?" The man slid a flash drive across the concrete divider between them. "Everything you need is there. Multiple backups exist. If anything happens to me, it goes public." Damien picked it up, feeling its weight. "Why not go to the authorities?" The man gave a bitter smile. "I don't trust systems built on favors. I trust consequences." They parted without another word. Damien drove home with the windows down, the cool night air clearing his head. He knew Accepting the drive made him a target. He also knew refusing it would have been a mistake he'd regret forever. At home, he powered up a secure laptop and began to review the contents. What he found made his stomach tighten. Miles hadn't just planned to frame him. Damien had been one of several executives, consultants, even a former partner, all strategically positioned, all expendable. Serena hadn't been the first, either. She had been chosen because of proximity and trust, but the pattern was older, more calculated. Damien leaned back, closing his eyes. This wasn't personal for Miles. It was industrial. His phone buzzed. Serena. He almost ignored it. Then he answered. "They're watching me," she said immediately, voice low and strained. "I don't know how, but they know where I am." Damien's chest tightened. "Stay inside. Lock the door." "I am," she whispered. "But Damien, I found something. Tell me." She hesitated. "There's an account. In my name, I didn't open it. But he used it. It's tied to the transfers." Damien closed his eyes. "That's important." "I know," she said, "and I'm scared." "Listen to me," Damien said firmly. "You did something wrong. But you're doing something right now. That matters." Her breath shook. "I don't want to be this person anymore." "Then don't be," Damien replied. "Help me finish this." The call ended abruptly. Not cut off. Ended. Damien didn't sleep. By morning, the story broke. It didn't come from him. It didn't come from Miles. It came from a third party, an investigative outlet with a reputation for patience and precision. The headline didn't mention Damien by name. It mentioned shell companies, offshore laundering, corporate manipulation. Miles Kincaid's photo sat beneath it. Damien watched the news feed update in real time. Comments flooded in. Analysts speculated. Names began to surface. He waited. An hour later, his phone rang. This time, it was Miles. Damien answered. "You think you've won?" Miles said without preamble. His voice was tight, stripped of its usual charm. "I think the truth is expensive," Damien replied. "And you're running out of currency. You don't understand what you've triggered." Miles snapped. "People like me don't go down alone." "I know," Damien said. "That's why I didn't try to be the hero." Silence pulsed on the line. Then Miles laughed, sharp and humorless. "You always were predictable." "Am I?" Damien asked. The call ended. Minutes later, Lena called. "Authorities are moving," she said. "Warrants, freezes. It's happening." Damien sat down, the weight of weeks pressing in all at once. He thought of Serena, trapped by her choices, but trying to claw her way back. He thought of the man in the parking garage, tired of lies. He thought of the missed call that had started it all. This wasn't over. He knew that. Miles would fight until the last door closed behind him, but for the first time, Damien felt something stronger than fear. He felt ready, and whatever came next, he would face it with his eyes open. The fallout was immediate and merciless. By noon, Damien's inbox was flooded with requests, framed as concern, but sharpened by suspicion. Legal teams wanted statements. Executives wanted reassurance. People who had once spoken freely now measured every word like it might be recorded and played back later. Damien answered what he could and deferred the rest. He understood now that truth didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in waves, and the first wave always hurt the most. Lena came by his office just before lunch, closing the door with a quiet finality. "They've frozen 3 of Miles's accounts," she said. 2 more are under review." Conrad resurfaced. Damien looked up. "Where?" "Trying to negotiate," Lena replied. "He wants immunity." Damien nodded. "He'll trade loyalty for survival. He always would." She studied him for a moment. "You're holding up better than I expected." "I don't have a choice," Damien said. "If I break now, it confirms everything they want to believe." Lena's expression softened. "Serena called me." Damien's jaw tightened. "Is she safe?" "For the moment," Lena said. "But she's scared." She thinks Miles is going to sacrifice her. Damien leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He had known this was coming. Miles didn't leave loose ends. He converted them into shields or scapegoats, depending on what the moment required. That account she mentioned? Damien said. It puts her directly in the blast radius. I know, Lena replied. She's considering going public. That would destroy her, Damien said quietly. It might also save you, Lena countered. Damien closed his eyes. This was the line he had hoped not to cross, the point where self-preservation demanded someone else's ruin. I won't let her do it alone, he said. Lena didn't argue. She rarely did when his voice took that tone. That evening, Damien drove to the safe location unannounced. Serena opened the door cautiously, relief flickering across her face when she saw him. She looked exhausted, eyes rimmed red, hair pulled back without care. You shouldn't be here, she said. I know, Damien replied. That's why I am. They sat at the small kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the spaces neither knew how to bridge. Finally, Serena spoke. They'll come for me, she said. He's already started distancing himself. Good, Damien said. That means he's afraid. She laughed weakly. You always say that like fear is useful. It is, Damien replied. If you know how to use it. She looked at him then. Really looked. As if trying to understand the man who had once felt so familiar. Why are you still helping me? She asked again, more softly this time. After everything, Damien didn't answer right away. Because if I let him turn you into collateral, then he wins twice, he said finally. And because I need you alive and honest. She nodded slowly. Then I'll do whatever it takes. He slid the flash drive across the table. This is what I have, he said. And this is what you have. He tapped the burner phone she'd placed beside her plate. Together, it's enough. Separately, it's a risk. Her hands shook as she picked up the drive. What happens to me? That depends on what you choose to do next, Damien said. I won't lie to you. She swallowed. If I testify, you'll lose things, Damien said, but you'll keep your future. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Damien met her gaze, steady and unflinching. You don't have to be strong, he said. You just have to be done lying. The next morning, the city woke to another headline. This one named names. Not Damien's. Not yet. It detailed a network, methodical and predatory, built to exploit trust and erase accountability. Miles Kincaid's name appeared again, this time alongside phrases like federal investigation and criminal exposure. Damien watched the coverage from his living room, coffee untouched. His phone buzzed with a text from Lena. Conrad flipped. He's giving them everything, Damien exhaled slowly. That's the spine, he murmured to no one. An hour later, Serena called. They want to speak to me, she said. Officially. Damien closed his eyes. I'll be there. The interview room was smaller than Damien expected, sterile, unforgiving. Serena sat across from two investigators, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Damien waited outside, pacing. Every step measured, he wasn't allowed in. He knew that. Still, being separated from the outcome tested a restraint he didn't know he had. Hours passed. When Serena finally emerged, she looked hollowed out but resolute. She met Damien's eyes and nodded once. It was done. They recorded everything, she said quietly. All of it. Damien placed a hand at the small of her back, guiding her toward the exit without comment. Outside, the air felt heavier, charged with the knowledge that no amount of truth came without cost. As they reached the car, Damien's phone rang. Miles. Damien hesitated, then answered. You think you've cornered me? Miles said, his voice fraying at the edges. But you don't understand how deep this goes. I understand enough, Damien replied. You've ruined her, Miles snapped. She'll never recover from this. You ruined her the moment you decided she was disposable, Damien said coldly. Silence followed, thick and volatile. This isn't over, Miles said at last. Damien's grip tightened on the phone. For you, he said. It is. He ended the call and looked at Serena. She was shaking, but there was something new in her eyes. Relief, or maybe surrender. What happens now? She asked. Now, Damien said, opening the car door. We wait, and we let the truth do what it does best. They drove away, as sirens echoed faintly in the distance, the city finally beginning to acknowledge the rot beneath its polished surface. Damien knew the coming days would be brutal. Reputations would fracture, lives would be rewritten. His own would never return to what it had been. But as the skyline receded behind them, Damien felt something settle into place. He hadn't won. Not yet. He had simply refused to lose himself. And that, he realized, might be the most dangerous thing he could have done to a man like Miles Kincaid. The waiting was worse than the confrontation. Damien learned that quickly. Once the statements were given and the documents handed over, there was nothing left to do but exist inside the consequences. Every hour stretched thin, filled with speculation and half-formed fears. He stayed visible, just as he had planned at work, at home, in public spaces, where nothing dramatic ever happened, and that, in itself, felt like a risk. Serena remained at the safe location, escorted when necessary, monitored more closely than she liked. She didn't complain. The bravado she once wore so easily had evaporated, replaced by a quiet vigilance that told Damien she finally understood the gravity of the world she had stepped into. They spoke less now, but when they did, there was no more performance, just facts, just truth. 3 days after her interview, the first warrant became public. Damien was in his office when the alert flashed across his screen. Miles Kincaid, detained for questioning, assets frozen pending investigation, possible charges spanning years. Damien stared at the headline longer than he expected to. He had imagined this moment as vindication, even relief. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Aware that the fall was real, but unsure how far it went, Lena appeared in the doorway moments later, her expression unreadable. It's happening, she said. Damien nodded. I saw, they're bringing him in downtown, she added. Conrad's testimony pushed it over the line. Damien leaned back slowly, and the collateral. Lena hesitated. That's where it gets complicated. His chest tightened. Define complicated. They're widening the scope, she said. Everyone connected, including you. Damien absorbed that without flinching. I expected that. They'll clear you, Lena continued. But it won't be quick. Your name will be in the air for a while. I can live with that, Damien replied. As long as the truth lands eventually. Lena studied him. You've changed. Good, Damien said quietly. That evening, Damien received permission to see Serena briefly. She looked thinner, worn down by the strain of waiting, but her eyes were clearer than he'd seen them in months. She didn't smile when he entered. She didn't cry. She simply stood, as if bracing for impact. They told me I might be charged, she said immediately. Damien didn't soften it. It's possible. She nodded, jaw set. I'll accept it. That surprised him. Why? Because I helped him, she said, even when I knew better, even when I told myself I was protecting you. Damien said nothing. He let the silence do its work. They showed me messages today, she continued. Between him and other women, other wives, I wasn't special. I was convenient. That was always the truth, Damien said. You just couldn't see it yet. Her eyes glistened. Do you hate me? Damien considered the question carefully. No, he said at last. But I don't trust you. She flinched, as if struck. Then she nodded. That's fair. They stood there, two people bound by history and undone by it, neither quite knowing how to let go without tearing something vital in the process. The next morning, the city woke to images of Miles Kincaid being escorted into a government building, jaw clenched, expression furious. The man who had once moved unseen now had cameras tracking his every step. Damien watched the footage without satisfaction. He recognized the look in Miles's eyes, not defeat, but calculation. Men like that didn't surrender easily. By afternoon, the backlash began. An anonymous blog post questioned Damien's integrity. A pundit speculated about his possible complicity. A former associate gave a vague interview that implied more than it said. None of it was substantiated. All of it was damaging. Damien shut off the television. He took a walk instead, moving through the city without destination, letting the noise wash over him. He passed people laughing, arguing, living lives untouched by the quiet implosions happening behind closed doors. For a moment, he envied them. Then he remembered how fragile that illusion was. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You should have taken the deal." Damien stopped walking. He typed back, "You should have told the truth." The reply came instantly. "This ends with you losing everything." Damien stared at the words, then deleted the conversation without responding. He had crossed the point where threats held power. That night, Lena came over with takeout. Neither of them ate much of. "Miles requested a private meeting," she said. "With me?" Damien asked. "Yes," she replied. "Through counsel. He says it's urgent." Damien laughed once, humorless. "Of course he does. You don't have to go." Lena said, "I know," Damien replied. "But I will." The meeting took place in a small conference room under supervision. Miles entered with less swagger than before, his suit impeccable but his posture rigid. He looked at Damien like a man confronting a mirror he didn't like. "You really did this," Miles said, skipping pleasantries. "You did," Damien replied. "I just stopped it," Miles scoffed. "You think this is justice? They'll tear you apart before they ever let you walk free." "Maybe," Damien said, "but I'll be honest, while they do." Miles leaned forward. "She turned on me," he said, venom lacing every word. "You turned on her first," Damien replied. Miles's lips curled. "You could have had everything. Money, power, protection." Damien met his gaze. "I already had enough." For the first time, Miles looked genuinely unsettled. "You're not like the others," he said slowly. "No," Damien agreed. "That's why this ends differently." The guards ended the meeting shortly after. As Miles was escorted out, he glanced back once, eyes burning with something close to hatred, and something else Damien recognized too well. Fear. Weeks passed. Investigations deepened. Names fell. Systems cracked. Damien cooperated fully, answering every question, providing every record. It cost him. His role was suspended pending review. Invitations dried up. Friends hesitated. But something else happened too. Strangers began to reach out. Quiet messages, thank yous from people who had been hurt by the same network. Whistleblowers who finally felt safe enough to speak. Damien realized the story was bigger than him now. It always had been. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he stood alone on his balcony, watching the city settle into night. His phone buzzed with a final update from Lena. "Miles has been formally charged. Multiple counts, no bail." Damien closed his eyes, the weight of it pressing in. It wasn't triumph he felt, it was release. Behind him, the apartment was still too quiet. Serena's things were gone now, boxed and stored elsewhere. Their life together existed only in memory and consequence. Damien knew healing wouldn't be linear. Some nights would be worse than others. But as the city lights flickered on, he understood something clearly for the first time since that missed call. The worst had already happened, and he was still standing. The suspension became official 2 days later. An email written in careful, legal language informed Damien that his duties were temporarily reassigned, pending final review. No accusation, no apology, just distance. He read it once, then archived it without response. He had learned that reacting too quickly only fed narratives he didn't control. The days slowed after that. Without the structure of work, time stretched in unfamiliar ways. Damien filled it deliberately. Morning runs, long walks, methodical organization of documents that no longer needed organizing. Control, he'd discovered, wasn't about power. It was about choosing where your attention went. Serena called less frequently now. When she did, the conversations were stripped of pretense, updates, logistics, no emotional bargaining. It hurt less that way, even if the ache underneath remained constant. One afternoon, Damien met Lena at a quiet park near the river. She looked tired but satisfied, the way people did when a storm had finally passed but left debris everywhere. "They're close to clearing you," she said as they sat on a bench overlooking the water. "Not publicly yet, but internally," Damien nodded. "And her?" Lena hesitated. "They'll charge her with a reduced count. Cooperation matters." Damien stared at the rippling surface of the river. She knew that was coming. "Yes," Lena said gently, "and she's still choosing it." That mattered more than he expected. As if summoned by the thought, Damien's phone buzzed. Serena's name lit the screen. "I have to go in again tomorrow," she said when he answered. Her voice was steadier than before. "They want clarification on the account." "I can be there," Damien said. "No," she replied. "This part is mine." He respected that. "Then tell the truth," he said. "All of it. I will," she promised. After the call ended, Damien felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, acceptance, the understanding that some bonds didn't need to be repaired to be acknowledged. They just needed to be laid to rest with honesty. That evening, Damien received a message he hadn't expected. It wasn't from an investigator or a journalist or Lena. It was from his mother. "I saw the news." It read, "Are you okay?" He stared at the words longer than he meant to. He hadn't told her. He'd hoped to spare her the worry. Instead, the truth had found its own way. "I'm still standing," he typed back. "That's something," she replied almost immediately. "Come by tomorrow. I'll make dinner." The simplicity of the invitation undid him more than any headline. He hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had offered him comfort without conditions. The next day, Damien drove to the house he'd grown up in. It looked smaller than he remembered, but the warmth inside was the same. His mother listened without interrupting, as he explained what had happened, not every detail, but enough. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. "You didn't fail," she said firmly. "You trusted. That's not the same thing." He swallowed. "It feels like it. That's because the cost was high," she replied, "not because the choice was wrong." He stayed longer than planned, leaving with leftovers and a quiet sense of grounding he hadn't felt in months. On the drive home, Damien noticed a car following him. At first, he dismissed it as paranoia. He'd been living under scrutiny for weeks. His instincts were hypersensitive. But when the car turned where he turned, slowed when he slowed, something cold settled in his gut. He didn't go home. Instead, he drove toward a busy commercial area, circling twice before pulling into a well-lit parking lot. He got out of the car and waited. The other car stopped several spaces away. A man stepped out, younger than Miles. Nervous, he approached slowly, hands visible. "Mr. Holt?" he asked. Damien didn't answer immediately. "Who are you?" "My name's Evan," the man said. "I used to work for Kincaid." Damien's pulse quickened. "That makes two of you." Evan nodded. "I heard what happened. About the charges. About you." "And," Damien prompted. "And I don't want to go down with him," Evan said. "I've been sitting on something. I didn't know who to give it to." Damien studied him carefully. "Why me?" "Because you survived," Evan replied. "And because he hates you." That tracked. They sat in Evan's car, doors open, the hum of traffic surrounding them. Evan showed Damien emails, audio clips, transaction trails, more evidence, redundant, but devastating in its scope. "I was supposed to delete this," Evan said. "He paid me to, and you didn't," Damien said. Evan shook his head. "I watched him ruin people, families. I couldn't be part of it anymore." Damien nodded slowly. "I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go," Evan exhaled, shoulders sagging with relief. "Thank you." After they parted, Damien forwarded the materials to Lena and to the investigators handling the case. He felt no rush of adrenaline this time, just certainty. The machine was dismantling itself now. That night, Damien dreamed for the first time in weeks. Not of Serena, not of Miles. He dreamed of water still, reflective, unthreatening. The next morning, Lena called with news. "Your clearance is coming through," she said. "Official statement next week. They're framing you as cooperative, not complicit." Damien closed his eyes. "And Miles, additional charges," she replied. "Thanks to your new friend." A quiet laugh escaped Damien before he could stop it. Not joy, release. Later that day, Serena called again. "They set a date," she said, "for my plea." Damien absorbed that. "How do you feel?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But lighter," he nodded. "That's usually how truth feels." They ended the call without ceremony. As evening fell, Damien stood by the window of his apartment, watching the city move on. People hurried past, unaware of the quiet endings and beginnings unfolding above them. He thought of the man he'd been before the missed call, confident, trusting, and certain of his place in the world. He wasn't that man anymore. But as he watched the lights flicker on, Damien realized he didn't want to be. That man had lived on assumptions. This one lived on evidence, boundaries, and hard-earned clarity. The injustice wasn't erased. The betrayal wasn't undone. But Damien Holt had walked through it without losing himself. And whatever came next, he would meet it on his own terms. The public statement came sooner than Damien expected. A press release, concise and carefully worded, cleared him of wrongdoing while acknowledging his cooperation. It didn't praise him. It didn't apologize. It simply corrected the record. Damien read it once, then set his phone aside, letting the quiet settle. Vindication, he was learning, rarely arrived with fireworks. It arrived like a door quietly closing behind you, locking something painful on the other side. By afternoon, messages began to change in tone. Where there had been distance, there was now politeness. Where there had been suspicion, there was cautious relief. A few colleagues reached out directly, offering support that felt genuine. If belated, Damien accepted it without resentment. He understood the fear that had kept them silent. Fear had a way of making decent people hesitate. He returned to the office the following week. The building looked the same, but the way people looked at him had shifted. Some met his eyes with newfound respect. Others avoided him entirely. Damien didn't mind either. He had stopped measuring his worth by proximity. Lena met him in the lobby, handing him a coffee. "You're officially back," she said. "Temporarily," Damien replied. She smiled faintly. "That's how it starts." They rode the elevator in silence. When the doors opened, Damien stepped into his old rhythm with a new awareness. He noticed the spaces where Miles's influence had once lingered, projects delayed, decisions stalled, people uncertain who they were allowed to trust. He began correcting things quietly, methodically, without drawing attention to himself. Rebuilding didn't require spectacle. It required consistency. That evening, Damien received an invitation he hadn't anticipated. A closed-door meeting with regulators and a handful of executives from organizations affected by Miles's network, not to interrogate him, to ask questions, to understand how the manipulation had gone undetected for so long. Damien agreed. The meeting took place in a neutral conference room with no logos on the walls. Faces around the table carried exhaustion and something close to shame. Damien spoke plainly, outlining the patterns he'd observed, the small allowances that had accumulated into systemic failure. He didn't accuse, he explained. When people trust systems more than people, he said quietly, they stop noticing who's benefiting from the blind spots. No one argued. Afterward, one of the executives lingered. "You could have protected yourself earlier," he said. "Why didn't you?" Damien considered the question. "Because I didn't know I was in danger until I was," he replied. "And once I did, it was too late to pretend otherwise." That night, Damien slept deeply for the first time in months. The next morning brought news from Serena's attorney. Her plea had been accepted. Reduced charges, probation, restitution, mandatory cooperation, no prison time. The relief Damien felt surprised him, not because he wanted her spared, but because the punishment fit the truth, accountability without annihilation. Serena called later that day. "It's done," she said. Her voice trembled, but there was steadiness beneath it. "I know," Damien replied. "I'm glad you told the truth." She hesitated. "I wanted you to hear it from me." He appreciated that more than he said. "Take care of yourself," he told her. "Really, you too," she said softly. When the call ended, Damien sat with the quiet, allowing himself a moment of grief he hadn't fully acknowledged. Not for the marriage as it had become, but for the future he'd once imagined. He let it pass without resistance. Grief, he'd learned, moved faster when you didn't fight it. Weeks later, Miles Kincaid was formally indicted. The charges were extensive, the language unforgiving. Damien watched the coverage with detached interest. He recognized the strategy now, how Miles's lawyers attempted to muddy timelines, question motives, suggest vendettas. None of it held. The evidence was too dense. The testimonies too aligned. Lena called him during one of the hearings. "He asked about you," she said. Damien raised an eyebrow. "In what way?" "He wanted to know if you were watching." Damien smiled faintly. "Tell him no." "But you are," Lena said. "Yes," Damien replied. "Just not the way he thinks." He didn't attend the trial. He didn't need to. Justice, he understood now, wasn't about witnessing someone else's downfall. It was about reclaiming your own life. As autumn edged closer, Damien began making changes that had nothing to do with recovery and everything to do with intention. He moved apartments, choosing a place with more light and less history. He donated the furniture that carried too many memories and kept only what felt honest. He simplified his schedule. He said no more often. Each choice felt like a small declaration of independence. One Saturday morning, he ran into Evan by chance at a cafe. Evan looked healthier, less haunted. They exchanged nods, then a brief conversation. "Thanks again," Evan said, "for not using what I gave you to make yourself look better." Damien shrugged. "The truth doesn't need branding." Evan smiled, relieved. "I'm starting over." "Good," Damien said. "It's underrated." As the months passed, Damien noticed something unexpected. People sought him out not for scandal, but for counsel. Quiet conversations, requests for advice. He listened more than he spoke, careful not to confuse experience with authority. One evening, after a long day, Damien stood on his balcony, watching the city glow. His phone buzzed with a final update from Lena. "Sentencing scheduled," she wrote. "He's looking at real time." Damien set the phone down and leaned against the railing. He didn't feel triumph, he felt closure. The memory of that missed call surfaced then, uninvited. The ring, the silence, the message that had cracked everything open. Damien realized something he hadn't before. That moment hadn't ruined his life. It had interrupted a lie he'd been living inside without knowing it. He breathed in the cool air, steady and unburdened. The city moved on below him, indifferent and alive. Damien felt no need to rush back into anything. No new relationships, no grand declarations. Healing, he understood now, wasn't about filling space. It was about learning to stand comfortably within it. Whatever came next would be chosen, not inherited. And for the first time since the night everything fell apart, Damien Holt felt fully, unmistakably free. Freedom. Damien learned, didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, quiet mornings without dread, evenings where his phone stayed silent for the right reasons, moments when his thoughts no longer circled the same old questions. Still, the past had a way of testing whether you truly meant to leave it behind. The first test came as an envelope slipped under his door one afternoon, thick, cream-colored, stamped with a law firm's seal. Damien recognized the name immediately. Miles's attorneys. He didn't open it right away. He made coffee, sat at the table, and waited until his pulse settled. Panic was a habit he refused to relearn. The letter was brief and surgical, a civil action. defamation, loss of earnings, a predictable move, framed to intimidate rather than win. Damien read it twice, then placed it in a folder, already labeled and ready. He forwarded a scan to Lena with a single line. As expected, her reply came minutes later, already anticipated. It won't go anywhere, Damien believed her. Still, the letter stirred something uncomfortable. Miles was caged, but he wasn't quiet. Men like him rarely were. That evening, Damien attended a small dinner hosted by an oversight committee he'd advised during the investigation. It wasn't celebratory, it was reflective. People spoke candidly about what had failed, what they'd missed, how easily trust had been outsourced to titles and reputation. "You saw it before we did," one woman said across the table. "Why?" Damien considered the question. "I didn't," he said honestly. "I felt it before I saw it. The numbers came later." She nodded slowly, absorbing that. "And when it became personal, that's when it mattered," Damien replied. "Not because it hurt me, but because it showed me how many others were exposed." The conversation drifted after that, but the respect lingered. Damien felt it not as validation, but as alignment. He was no longer fighting to be believed. He was being listened to. 2 days later, Serena asked to meet. Damien hesitated before replying. He had grown used to measured distance, to interactions stripped of emotional undertow. Still, avoidance wasn't the same as boundaries. They met at a quiet cafe near the river. Early enough that the crowd hadn't yet formed, Serena arrived first, seated with her hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. She stood when she saw him, uncertain. "Thank you for coming," she said. Damien nodded and took the seat across from her. "You said it was important," she swallowed. "I'm leaving the city." He didn't react immediately. "When?" "Soon," she replied. "I've been offered a position. Remote, it's a chance to rebuild without reminders everywhere." "That sounds wise," Damien said, her shoulders relaxed slightly. "I wanted you to hear it from me, not as an escape, as a decision." "I understand," Damien replied. And he did. Leaving wasn't running anymore. It was choosing context. She looked at him carefully. "I don't expect forgiveness." "I know," Damien said. "But I wanted to say this," she continued, voice steady. "What happened to you, what I did, it didn't just expose Miles, it exposed me. The parts of myself I ignored, I'm facing that now." Damien studied her face. He saw remorse without performance, growth without expectation. It didn't erase the past. It didn't need to. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said quietly. She nodded, eyes bright but controlled. "I hope you already have." They stood, an awkward pause stretching between them. Then Serena extended her hand. Damien took it, brief and respectful. When she walked away, he felt the door close not with force, but with finality. The next test came from an unexpected place. Damien's mother called one evening, her voice light. "I ran into someone today," she said. "Oh," Damien replied, wary but curious. "Miles's sister," she continued, "at the grocery store." Damien closed his eyes, and, "She wanted to talk," his mother said. "I told her I didn't think it was appropriate." "Thank you," Damien said. "She said he's blaming you," his mother added gently. "Says you ruined his life." Damien exhaled. "He ruined his own." "I know," she said. "I just thought you should be prepared. Some people never accept responsibility." "I am prepared," Damien replied. And he was. Not long after, Lena confirmed the civil suit had been dismissed. Quietly, efficiently, Miles's last attempt at control collapsed under its own weight. There would be no more shadows reaching for Damien's ankles. With the noise finally fading, Damien began to notice how much space he had, space to think, space to choose. He filled some of it with work, some with silence, and some with people who didn't ask him to explain himself. One afternoon, he received an invitation to speak not at a conference, but at a closed workshop for ethics investigators. He hesitated, then accepted, not to tell his story, but to answer questions. He spoke plainly about patterns, about human behavior, about how power often hid in convenience rather than force. When it was over, a young investigator approached him. "How do you trust again?" she asked. After something like that, Damien paused. "You don't start with trust," he said. "You start with boundaries. Trust grows when boundaries are respected." She nodded, relieved. As winter approached, Damien felt a quiet sense of arrival. Not happiness in the traditional sense, but steadiness. His days were his own. His nights were calm. The world no longer felt like it was waiting to accuse him. On the day of Miles's sentencing, Damien didn't watch the news. He took a long walk instead, following the river as it curved through the city. He thought about the man Miles had been before power distorted him, and the man Damien had been before betrayal sharpened him. Neither reflection held resentment anymore. That evening, Lena texted him a single line, "Sentenced, significant time." Damien replied with a thumbs up, then put his phone away. He stood at his window as darkness settled, the city lights blinking on one by one. He felt no urge to mark the moment. Justice had done its work. Healing was doing its own. Damien understood now that the most profound victory wasn't survival or vindication. It was the quiet knowledge that he no longer lived in reaction to someone else's lies. He lived in alignment with his own truth, and that, at last, was enough. Winter settled in with a discipline Damien respected. The cold stripped the city down to essentials, forcing honesty in how people moved, how they spoke, how long they lingered outside their own warmth. He found himself enjoying the simplicity of it. No expectations, no performances, just breath, pace, and choice. The invitation arrived on a gray morning, slipped into his calendar without fanfare. A private mediation forum, invitation only bringing together regulators, compliance leads, and a few people who had lived on the wrong side of sophisticated manipulation and survived it. Damien hesitated longer this time. He had grown comfortable with distance. Stepping back into rooms shaped by crisis felt like reopening a door he'd finally closed. He went anyway. The room was smaller than he expected. No cameras, no press, just a circle of chairs and a shared understanding that what had happened to them wasn't unique. It was patterned. Damien listened more than he spoke. He heard variations of the same story told in different accents. Trust misplaced, silence rewarded, warnings ignored until they became catastrophes. When it was his turn, he didn't recount the affair or the missed call. He talked about erosion, about how small compromises normalized larger ones, about how people often confused calm leadership with absence. He noticed heads nodding, not because they admired him, but because they recognized themselves. Afterward, a man approached him quietly, older, deliberate, eyes too observant to be casual. "I watched the Kincaid case closely," he said. "You did something unusual." Damien waited. "You didn't rush to be believed," the man continued. "You let the facts speak." "I didn't have the luxury of anything else," Damien replied. The man smiled faintly. "You do now. If you ever want to consult off the record, call me." He handed Damien a card without a logo. Damien tucked it away. 12 Anon. 2, 12, 12, 12. Unsure whether he'd ever use it. The act itself felt symbolic. He no longer needed to chase relevance. Relevance found him when it mattered. That evening, Serena called from the airport. Damien hadn't expected that. He answered without tension. "I'm boarding," she said. "I wanted to say goodbye." "I know," Damien replied. "I won't contact you again unless you ask," she said quickly, not pleading. "This isn't guilt, it's respect." He appreciated the distinction. "I wish you well," he said, and he meant it. When the call ended, Damien sat with the finality of it. He didn't mourn. He acknowledged. Some chapters ended cleanly, not because they were painless, but because they were complete. The next test came without warning. A journalist published a long-form piece, revisiting the case, not sensational, but thorough. Damien's name appeared alongside phrases like quiet architect of exposure and unintended whistleblower. The tone was respectful, but the reach was wide. By nightfall, his inbox filled with interview requests he didn't want. He declined all of them, Lena called, amused. You're becoming a symbol, she said. I don't want to be, Damien replied. That's why you are, she said. People trust restraint. People misunderstand restraint, Damien countered. Sometimes, Lena agreed, but not always. Damien learned to let the noise pass. He focused on what he could control. He accepted a limited advisory role, with clear boundaries and transparency built into every decision. He reconnected with friends he'd neglected, not to explain, but to be present. He began therapy, not because he was broken, but because he wanted to understand what staying intact required. In one session, his therapist asked, "What scares you now?" Damien thought about it. "Complacency," he said finally, thinking it couldn't happen again. "And what protects you from that?" she asked. "Attention," he replied. "And humility." As winter edged toward spring, Damien felt a familiar tension return, not anxiety, but readiness. He knew the story wasn't fully done with him yet. Big systems rarely ended quietly. They shed fragments. The fragment arrived as a subpoena, not against him. For him, testimony requested in a secondary case, branching from Kincaid's network. Another executive, another shell structure, another attempt to bury accountability. Damien read the request twice, then accepted. This time, he didn't hesitate. The hearing was brief and controlled. Damien answered questions directly, correcting assumptions when necessary, refusing speculation. When asked how he'd identified the manipulation so late, he answered honestly. "I didn't identify it late," he said. "I identified it when it finally contradicted my values." The judge nodded once, as if that clarified something beyond the case. Afterward, in the hallway, a woman approached him, eyes rimmed with fatigue. "My husband went down because of that network," she said. "He didn't survive the fallout." Damien felt the air leave his lungs. "I'm sorry," he said. She studied him, searching for something. "You didn't save him," she said gently. "But you stopped it from taking more." He didn't trust himself to speak. She squeezed his hand once and walked away. That night, Damien sat alone, the city quiet beneath his windows. He thought of all the lives intersecting through decisions made in rooms like the ones he'd sat in. He thought of how close he'd come to being another silent casualty. He slept poorly, then woke early and went for a run, letting the cold air burn clarity into his lungs. Movement helped. It always had. Weeks later, Lena invited him to dinner. Just dinner, no agenda. They talked about trivial things, the weather, bad movies, mutual acquaintances who'd aged badly. At one point, Lena studied him over her glass. "You're different," she said. "But not hardened." "I was afraid of that," Damien admitted. "Hardened people close," she said. "You didn't." They lingered longer than planned, neither in a hurry to return to solitude. As spring finally broke through, Damien found himself standing at the edge of the river again, the water higher, faster, reflecting a brighter sky. He remembered the man he'd been when he'd stood there months earlier, angry, focused, braced for impact. Now, he felt open, not naive, open. His phone buzzed with a final update from the court system. The last related appeal had been denied. The web was fully dismantled. Damien put the phone away and watched the water move. He didn't feel like celebrating. He felt like living. And for the first time, he understood that healing wasn't about closing the door on the past. It was about leaving it unlocked, no longer afraid of what might knock. Spring brought with it a different kind of noise construction, traffic, conversations spilling out of cafes, as if the city itself had decided to inhale deeply. After a long winter, Damien noticed the change, not because it was loud, but because it no longer startled him. He moved through it, with an ease that would have felt impossible months earlier. The appeal's denial should have been the end. On paper, it was. The network dismantled, sentences handed down, records sealed. But reality was rarely so clean. Systems collapsed slowly, and the debris didn't always fall where you expected. The call came late one evening, well past the hour when people usually reached out unless something was wrong. Damien recognized the number immediately. Detective Raphael Sloan. They hadn't spoken in weeks. "Sorry to call this late," Sloan said without preamble. "But I thought you'd want to know." Damien leaned against the kitchen counter. "Listening." "Know what?" "One of Kincaid's former partners," Sloan said. "The one who vanished before charges were filed. He resurfaced." Damien's jaw tightened. "Where?" "Not here," Sloan replied. "And that's the problem?" "He's been talking. To the press. Off the record." Damien exhaled slowly. "About me. About you. Serena. The investigation," Sloan said. "About how you supposedly orchestrated everything to save yourself." There it was. The final reach. "Do they believe him?" Damien asked. "Some will," Sloan replied honestly. "He's good at telling stories, and people love a twist." After the call ended, Damien stood still for a long moment, letting the familiar tension settle without taking over. He had expected something like this. Closure always tempted revisionists. The article published 3 days later, long, speculative, laced with unnamed sources, and carefully planted doubt. It didn't accuse outright. It insinuated, suggested, asked questions without answering them. Damien's name appeared just often enough to keep him tethered to the narrative. Lena called as soon as it broke. "Don't respond," she said firmly. "That's what he wants." "I know," Damien replied. "Do you?" she pressed. "Because this is the part where silence feels like surrender." Damien watched the city through his window, calm settling in. "Silence isn't surrender," he said. "It's refusal." He didn't issue a statement. He didn't request corrections. He went about his life as if the article didn't exist. He attended meetings. He kept appointments. He smiled at baristas. He lived. The effect was subtle, but it worked. Without reaction, the story lost momentum. Another headline replaced it. Another outrage took its place. By the end of the week, the article was buried beneath fresher noise. That was when Serena reached out again. Damien hadn't expected to hear from her so soon after their last conversation. He stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "I saw it," she wrote. "I'm sorry." He typed back carefully. "It isn't your fault," she replied almost immediately. "It feels like it is." "He wouldn't be saying my name if I hadn't," Damien interrupted the thought. "Stop. This is about him trying to stay relevant, not about you." There was a pause. Then, "Are you okay?" Damien considered the question. He answered honestly, "Yes." The truth surprised even him. A week later, Damien was asked to speak again, this time not about fraud or systems, but about recovery. A small, private group of professionals who had been publicly implicated and later cleared, people carrying invisible scars. He accepted. The room was quiet, the mood heavy with unspoken shame. Damien didn't lecture. He told them what it felt like to be watched, doubted, suspended in uncertainty. He told them about the loneliness of restraint. He didn't promise it would pass quickly. He promised it would pass honestly. Afterward, a man approached him, voice tight. "How did you stop wanting revenge?" Damien thought about Miles, about the wasted energy of hatred. "I didn't stop wanting it," he said. "I just stopped letting it decide who I became." The man nodded, absorbing that. That night, Damien walked home instead of taking a car. The city felt different under his feet, less threatening, more textured. He noticed things he'd missed before. The smell of rain on warm concrete, laughter echoing between buildings, life happening without his permission. At home, he found an envelope waiting by his door. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. He deserved it. No signature. Damien stared at the words for a long time. He didn't know who had sent it. An ally. A casualty. Someone seeking absolution. He folded the paper once and placed it in a drawer, uncertain whether it was meant as comfort or warning. That night, he dreamed of standing in a room full of mirrors. Every reflection showed a different version of him, angry, fearful, confident, broken. He woke before choosing which one was real. The answer came gradually. Damien began volunteering quietly, offering time rather than expertise. He mentored without branding it as such. He listened more than he spoke. He allowed himself to be human in ways his old life hadn't permitted. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes, he found the phone he'd used the night everything began. The screen was cracked, the battery dead. He turned it over in his hands, remembering the moment the message had arrived. "I'm busy." He didn't feel anger now. He felt distance. He recycled the phone and kept the box empty. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. In the most ordinary place, Damien was leaving a grocery store when a man stepped into his path. Older than Damien remembered, thinner, eyes sharp with resentment, Miles's brother. "You think you're a hero," the man said quietly. Damien stopped, keeping his voice calm. "I don't think about your family at all." The man scoffed. "You destroyed mine. Your brother did," Damien replied. "I just didn't cover it up." The man's jaw tightened. "You could have walked away." "So could he," Damien said. For a moment, it looked like the man might say more. Then he stepped aside, bitterness trailing him like exhaust. Damien walked on without looking back. Later that evening, he told Lena about the encounter. She shook her head. "You handled it well." "I didn't feel anything," Damien said. "That surprised me." "That's growth," she replied. "Not numbness, resolution." As summer approached, Damien realized he was no longer waiting for the past to resurface. It had lost its teeth. The questions that once haunted him now felt answered. Even if the answers weren't pleasant, he stood on his balcony again, the river reflecting the orange fade of dusk. He thought of the promise he'd made to himself, the night of the missed call, not to beg, not to chase, not to lie to himself. He had kept it. Whatever story others told about that night, Damien knew the truth of it. It wasn't the moment he lost his wife. It was the moment he stopped losing himself. Summer arrived without ceremony. One day the air was simply warmer, heavier, carrying the scent of cut grass and asphalt baked too long in the sun. Damien noticed it on his morning run, the way his breath no longer fogged, the way the city seemed to move with a little less urgency. Life, it turned out, didn't wait for closure to keep going. He had settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than imposed. Work was steady again, though different. His role had shifted, less visibility, more influence. He preferred it that way. Decisions mattered more when they weren't made for applause. People came to him now with problems they didn't want turned into theater. He listened, asked questions, and said no when something felt wrong, even if it slowed things down, especially if it slowed things down. Trust, he'd learned, wasn't about speed. One afternoon, as Damien was leaving the office, he received a message from Serena's attorney. Not a request, an update. Serena's probation terms had been finalized, restitution scheduled, counseling mandated. She had complied with everything so far. Damien read the message once, and then locked his phone. He didn't feel relief or sadness, just acknowledgement. Accountability, when done properly, didn't require an audience. Later that evening, he found himself standing in front of a small art gallery he hadn't planned to visit. The lights inside were warm, inviting. He went in on impulse. The walls were lined with abstract pieces, fractured shapes, muted colors, tension held together by careful balance. Damien lingered longer than expected in front of one painting, a mass of dark blues broken by a single line of white cutting through the center. "It's about rupture," a voice beside him said. Damien turned. The woman smiled, gesturing toward the painting. "Or repair," she added. "Depending on who's looking. Maybe both." Damien replied. She nodded, thoughtful. That's usually the truth. They talked briefly about art, about the city, about nothing that required explanation. When she introduced herself, Damien did the same, without titles or context. When they parted, it felt clean. No expectation, no urgency. Just a reminder that connection didn't have to come with cost. On his way home, Damien thought about how different that felt from the way he'd once lived. Every interaction weighed, every silence filled. He realized something quietly important. He was no longer bracing for disappointment. The test of that realization came a week later. An invitation arrived in the mail, handwritten and formal. A family gathering. Miles's family. Damien read it twice, then a third time. There was no apology in the wording. No accusation either. Just a request to attend, framed as an attempt at closure. He didn't answer right away. That night, he called his mother. "What would you do?" he asked. She paused. "Do you owe them anything?" "No," Damien said. "Then only go if it gives you something," she replied. "Not them." He thought about that long after the call ended. Closure, he knew now. It was often a disguise for unresolved anger. He wasn't responsible for soothing wounds he hadn't caused. He declined the invitation politely. The next morning, Lena met him for coffee. She raised an eyebrow when he mentioned it. "Smart choice," she said. "They want absolution without accountability." "I don't hate them," Damien replied. "You don't have to," Lena said. Distance can be compassion. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Lena spoke again. "You know, you're not angry anymore." Damien considered it. "I think I ran out." She smiled. "Good. Anger is expensive." That evening, Damien received a call from Detective Sloan. They hadn't spoken in months. "Just checking in," Sloan said. "Everything quiet on your end?" "Yes," Damien replied. "Good," Sloan said. "That's usually how it ends." After the call, Damien stood at his window, watching the last light drain from the sky. He thought about the man he'd been when this all started, how tightly he'd held on to certainty, how deeply he'd believed that being good guaranteed safety. He knew better now. Safety wasn't guaranteed. Integrity was chosen. A few days later, Serena sent him a letter. Not an email, not a message. A letter. He recognized her handwriting immediately. He didn't open it right away. When he did, he read it slowly. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't explain herself again. She wrote about learning to sit with discomfort, about how losing everything she thought defined her had forced her to see who she was without it. She thanked him not for protecting her, but for refusing to lie for her, for drawing a line she couldn't cross again. At the end, she wrote, "I won't contact you again. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what you meant when you said clarity was kinder than confusion." Damien folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not as a keepsake, as a marker. Some truths didn't need to be revisited to remain true. As summer deepened, Damien found himself laughing more easily. He accepted invitations again. He hosted small dinners with friends, uncomplicated and loud. He traveled without anxiety, trusting that nothing would collapse if he stepped away. One evening, while walking home after dinner, he passed the cafe where he'd first seen Serena with Miles. The memory surfaced briefly, then passed. The place no longer held power over him. It was just another storefront, another table by the window. That realization felt like victory. The final reckoning came not as confrontation, but as choice. Damien was offered a promotion public, prestigious, undeniably tempting. It would mean visibility, influence, and a return to the version of success he'd once pursued. He read the offer carefully, then declined. Instead, he proposed something smaller, more transparent, less flattering. A role that prioritized oversight over optics. The response was hesitant, then respectful. He accepted the revised offer. On his first day in the new position, Damien arrived early. The building was quiet, the halls empty. He stood by a window overlooking the city, sunlight catching on glass and steel, and felt no rush to prove anything. Later that afternoon, he received a message from the woman at the gallery, simple, friendly, asking if he wanted to see another exhibit. He smiled as he typed his reply, yes. As he shut down his computer and stepped outside into the warmth of the evening, Damien realized something that would have terrified him months ago. He didn't need the story anymore. Not as armor, not as identity, not as warning. It had served its purpose. It had stripped him down, sharpened him, and then finally let him go. Whatever came next wouldn't be defined by betrayal or redemption. It would be defined by choice. And for the first time in a long time, Damien Holt trusted himself completely to make it. Sometimes betrayal doesn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes quietly, disguised as a missed call, a vague excuse, a moment where your instincts whisper, but your heart chooses silence. The deepest lesson in this story isn't about revenge or winning. It's about self-respect. When you stop negotiating with lies, when you choose clarity over comfort, you reclaim something no one can steal, your sense of self. Healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Often, it means walking away with honesty, setting boundaries that protect your future, and accepting that love without respect is never enough. You can grieve what you lost and still be grateful for what the truth gave you. Growth is painful, but it's also freeing. And sometimes, the moment that breaks you is the exact moment that saves you. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know how it made you feel, and if you're drawn to stories about resilience, betrayal, and healing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with the channel for more stories like this.